The day of the funeral should have been about grief, not suspicion, but my gut had already been gnawing at me for weeks. My father-in-law had been sick a long time, cancer eating him away, and Melissa spent more nights at the hospital than at home. I told myself she was being a good daughter, that I couldn't blame her for wanting to be there in his last days. But still, some part of me wondered why she came home at 3 in the morning smelling not like antiseptic or stale hospital coffee, but cologne. A sharp, woody scent I didn't recognize. I shoved it down, told myself it was stress playing tricks on me. But standing there in a black suit, in the church packed with relatives and neighbors, I couldn't shake the itch crawling in my chest. Melissa was up front, holding her mother's hand, crying softly, every bit the grieving daughter. I tried to focus on the pastor's words, but my eyes kept wandering, scanning the crowd, the clusters of family, the old friends whispering in the back pews. That's when I noticed him. Richard. My father-in-law's lifelong friend, practically an uncle in this family. Tall, broad-shouldered even in his 60s, with that easy smile that always felt a little too polished. He wasn't sitting with his wife, she died years ago, but he wasn't alone either. He sat angled toward Melissa, eyes fixed on her in a way that didn't look like comfort. It looked like possession. My pulse ticked faster. I told myself I was imagining it, that grief makes people stare too long, but the longer I watched the harder it was to ignore. His eyes weren't wet with tears. They were hungry. And Melissa, God, Melissa glanced back once, just once, but enough for me to catch the flicker of recognition. Not daughter to father's friend recognition. Something heavier. Something guilty. The service ended. Pallbearers moved the casket down the aisle, and I followed, my hands trembling on the polished wood. At the graveside I stood beside Melissa, her tears streaking her makeup, her body leaning against mine. Anyone watching would have thought we were united, mourning together. But all I could think of was Richard's eyes burning holes into her back. Later, at the reception in the church hall, the family gathered around casseroles and bad coffee, trading stories about her father. Melissa disappeared into the crowd and I found myself alone by the punch bowl. Then I saw it again. Richard, slipping quietly out the side door. Seconds later, Melissa excused herself from her aunt with a weak smile and followed the same way. My stomach flipped. My fists clenched. This wasn't grief. This was something else. I waited 5 minutes, heart pounding so loud I thought it would draw stares, then I pushed through that same side door into the cold afternoon air. The sight that met me shattered whatever hope I'd been clinging to. The church's side yard was nearly empty, just patches of wet grass and the smell of turned soil from the fresh grave. I stepped out into the chill, pulling my jacket tighter, eyes darting left and right. At first I thought maybe I'd overreacted, maybe Melissa just needed air, maybe Richard had stepped out to smoke. But then I caught voices, hushed and sharp, coming from behind the row of storage sheds near the back fence. I crept closer, shoes crunching on gravel, every nerve screaming that I was about to cross a line I couldn't uncross. And then I heard her laugh. Not the broken, grieving sob she'd given her mother minutes earlier. A light, breathy laugh I hadn't heard from her in months, one that always came when she wanted to be charming. My blood went cold. I edged closer, peering around the corner of the shed, and what I saw made my vision blur with rage. Melissa stood pressed against the wooden wall, her black dress wrinkled where Richard's hand gripped her waist. His head was bent close to hers, whispering something that made her bite her lip, and then he kissed her, slow, deliberate, not the kind of kiss born out of drunken grief, but the practiced intimacy of people who had been doing it for years. She let him. She didn't push him away, didn't even glance around in fear of being caught. Her hands slid up his chest like they belonged there. My knees nearly buckled. My father-in-law's casket wasn't even fully lowered into the ground and here she was, pawing at his best friend like it was the most natural thing in the world. I stumbled back before they could see me, my stomach twisting while burning my throat. My head spun with images I didn't want but couldn't stop. The late nights at the hospital, the cologne that clung to her clothes, the way she always insisted on going alone. How blind had I been? How long had she been using her father's illness as a cover for this filth? My hands shook so badly I had to press them against my thighs just to stay upright. I couldn't storm in there. Not yet. Not at his funeral, not with her entire family inside. They'd paint me as the monster, the jealous husband making a scene during grief. I needed to be smart. I forced myself to walk back inside, every step heavy, every fake smile from her cousin stabbing into me like a knife. Melissa returned 10 minutes later, cheeks flushed, hair slightly mussed, but nobody noticed. Nobody except me. She slid her arm around my waist, resting her head against me like she was the perfect grieving wife. I wanted to shove her off, scream the truth into the hall, but I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. The rest of the afternoon dragged on like a nightmare. People told stories about her father toasted his life, while I stood there hollow, watching her laugh too loudly at Richard's jokes, watching him pour her wine like it was his right. At one point I caught his hand brush against hers under the table, a fleeting touch, but her little smile confirmed everything. It wasn't new. It wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern, and I just stumbled onto the ugliest truth of my marriage. When we finally got home that evening, the house felt colder than the graveyard. Melissa kicked off her heels, sighed dramatically, and muttered about how exhausting funerals were. I stood in the doorway watching her, fists tight in my pockets. She turned, caught my stare, and frowned. "What?" she asked, tone sharp, defensive. I almost told her right then. Almost threw it all in her face. But instead I said nothing, just shook my head and walked upstairs, leaving her to pour another glass of wine. Lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling while she snored beside me, I knew I couldn't keep silent. I had to know how deep it went, how long it had been happening, and just how far she'd betrayed me. My father-in-law deserved better. Hell, I deserved better. And if she thought she could bury this truth in the same ground as her father, she had another thing coming. Because I was going to dig it up, piece by piece, until she had nowhere left to hide. I didn't sleep that night, not even a minute. I lay there stiff on the mattress with her arm draped across my chest, that familiar weight that once felt comforting but now felt like a shackle. Her breath was steady, peaceful, as if she hadn't just been kissing another man behind a church shed while her father's coffin was still in sight. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Richard's hand on her waist, his lips pressed against hers, her face lit up in a way she never gave me anymore. By sunrise I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't just sit here drowning in images. I needed proof. The kind she couldn't twist or cry her way out of. So the next morning, while she went to console her mother, I started digging. Literally digging, through drawers, cabinets, her purse. I told myself I'd feel guilty if I was wrong, but the memory of her flushed cheeks, that laugh, that lip bite, silenced every doubt. In her purse I found her phone, locked tight, face down like always. Nothing new. In the back of her closet though, behind a box of old photo albums, I found a smaller box I'd never seen before. My pulse jumped. Inside were keepsakes, ticket stubs, napkins with phone numbers, and, God help me, a folded photo of her and Richard at some restaurant, wine glasses in front of them, his arms slung over her chair. Not her father's friend comforting a daughter. Lovers. The way they looked at each other in that photo made me feel like the past 10 years of my marriage were a joke. I snapped photos of everything with my phone, heart hammering, hands sweaty. I put the box back exactly where it was, careful to cover my tracks. Then I drove to the cemetery under the excuse of checking flowers, but really I was watching. Sure enough, Richard's car was already parked there, Melissa's right beside it. She was leaning against his hood, her head on his shoulder, both of them dressed like they'd rolled straight from bed. My stomach clenched while rising. I crouched low behind a line of gravestones, snapped photo after photo, zoomed until the screen blurred. Each picture was a nail in her coffin. When they finally left separately, I sat there on the damp grass shaking, my mind spinning between rage and despair. It wasn't just grief sex. It wasn't a one-off lapse at the funeral. This was ongoing, practiced, dangerous. My wife had been carrying on an affair with her dead father's best friend right under my nose, and if I hadn't followed that instinct at the church I'd still be blind. That night I kept quiet, played my part, even kissed her cheek when she slid into bed. But my phone under the pillow held the images, the photo of them at the restaurant, the shots at the cemetery, all of it. And lying there, staring into the dark, I made myself another promise. I wouldn't just catch them. I'd make sure when I exposed them they couldn't crawl out of it. Not her, not him. Because if they wanted to bury me in lies, I was going to bury them in the truth. The following week felt like living in a theater production where I was the only one who knew the script was fake. Melissa smiled at me over breakfast, asked if I could fix the squeaky door in the laundry room, texted me in the middle of the day with little hearts like nothing had changed. Every gesture was acid on my skin. At night she rolled close, breathing soft against my neck, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from shoving her away. Because now every touch was contaminated with Richard's shadow, every kiss tasted like him. I wasn't just her husband anymore, I was her cover, her mask, her alibi. I knew a confrontation in our kitchen would only end with tears and lies, the kind where she'd twist everything until I was the villain for snooping. No, if I wanted this to stick, I had to hit her where she couldn't spin it. In front of family, in front of people whose judgment actually mattered to her. That's when the idea came. Melissa's mother had planned a memorial dinner for the following Saturday, A big gathering at the house where everyone would share stories about her father. Dozens of relatives. Richard included. The thought of sitting at the same table with him made my stomach clench, but it also gave me the stage. If I dropped the truth there, in front of everyone, the fallout would be nuclear. All week I collected ammo. I copied the photos onto a flash drive and printed a neat stack of glossy 8x10s at a print shop 2 towns over so nobody local would see. I added the shot of them kissing behind the church shed, the cemetery embrace, the restaurant photo from her hidden box. I even wrote down the dates and times so when they tried to lie, I'd have a timeline to crush them with. I hid everything in a folder marked insurance and slipped it into my briefcase. Saturday came fast. The house buzzed with relatives carrying casserole dishes, the air thick with grief and nostalgia. I shook hands, accepted pats on the back, smiled like a dutiful son-in-law, but my insides were coiled like barbed wire. Melissa flitted around pouring drinks, hugging cousins, laughing too easily. Richard arrived late, of course, striding in with that false humility, hand resting too long on her shoulder as he offered condolences to her mother. My jaw nearly cracked. We gathered around the long dining table, candles lit, plates steaming. Stories flowed, funny ones, sad ones, memories of her father fixing cars, teaching the grandkids to fish. Melissa spoke too, voice trembling, tears slipping down her cheeks, and everyone murmured how strong she was. I stared at her, my own wife, putting on a show of loyalty while the man she betrayed me with sat 3 chairs down. My hands itched toward the folder under my chair. Then Richard raised his glass. "To a good man," he said, voice thick with fake grief, "and to the family he loved." Melissa's eyes met his over the rim of her glass, and that flicker passed between them again, the same one I'd seen at the funeral. That was it. The last straw. I set my fork down, stood slowly and cleared my throat. Every head turned. My voice was steady, calm, the way it gets when you've rehearsed rage so long it cools into steel. "I think there's something everyone here deserves to know," I said. Melissa stiffened instantly, her smile faltering. Richard's glass froze halfway back to the table. I bent down, pulled the folder from my briefcase, and spread the glossy photos across the linen tablecloth one by one. Gasps broke the room like gunshots. A cousin swore under his breath. Her mother's fork clattered to her plate. Melissa's face drained of color, her lips parting in horror. Richard leaned forward, eyes flashing, but the evidence was undeniable. Melissa in his arms at the cemetery, his lips on hers behind the church, their secret dinner together. "You two want to play house while lying to everyone who ever trusted you?" I said, voice rising. "Fine. But not on my watch. Not on his grave." The room erupted. Her mother shouted Melissa's name like a curse. Cousins demanded answers. Richard muttered something about misunderstandings that only made it worse. Melissa reached for my arm, begging under her breath, "Please don't do this here." But it was already done. And as I looked around at the faces of her family, faces filled with disgust and betrayal, I realized I'd just burned every bridge she thought she could hide behind. The room exploded like a bomb had gone off in the middle of the table. Melissa's mother shoved her chair back so hard it toppled, her voice slicing through the air. "How could you do this to your father's memory?" Melissa stammered, reaching toward her, but her mother slapped the photos off the table, glossy prints scattering to the floor like fallen leaves. Cousins murmured curses, one uncle slammed his fist down and demanded, "With him? With Richard? While your father was dying?" Every word was a knife. Melissa's face crumpled, tears streaking her mascara, but no one rushed to comfort her. Not this time. Richard tried to stand, puffing his chest, his voice shaking with anger more than shame. "This isn't what it looks like," he started, but I cut him off with a snarl. "Really? Because it looks like you couldn't keep your hands off your best friend's daughter. It looks like while he was in a hospital bed, you were sneaking around behind a shed, behind gravestones, behind me." Gasps again, sharper this time. A cousin muttered, "Sick bastard," under his breath. Richard's hands curled into fists, his jaw flexing, but he stayed seated, eyes darting to Melissa like maybe she'd save him. She couldn't even meet his gaze. Her brother, normally the quiet one, suddenly shot up, pointing a shaking finger at Richard. "You were supposed to be family. He trusted you. We all did." Then he turned to Melissa, voice cracking with rage. "And you, Jesus, Melissa, Dad's body wasn't even cold." His shout rattled the chandelier. Melissa sobbed, tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. "It wasn't, it's not." That's when Richard finally snapped, slamming his palms on the table and rising to his full height. "Enough. This is none of your business. You all think you know, but you don't. Your father, he He stopped himself, breath heaving, face flushed. The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. Everyone's eyes bored into him, demanding the rest. My chest tightened. What the hell was he about to say? Melissa's mother's voice shook with fury. Don't you dare speak his name. She pointed to the door, eyes blazing. Get out. Both of you. Now. Melissa collapsed into her chair, sobbing, but Richard stood rigid, his gaze sweeping the table like he wanted to burn every face into memory. Then his eyes landed on me. Calculating. You think you've won? He said quietly, too quiet for anyone else, but I heard it clear as thunder. This isn't over. Before I could respond, her brother lunged, shoving Richard hard in the chest. Chairs scraped, people screamed. Two cousins pulled him back before fists flew, but the damage was done. Richard straightened his jacket, glared at me one last time and stormed out into the night. Melissa tried to follow, but her mother grabbed her arm and hissed, "Sit down, damn you." The look on her face said Melissa was already dead to her. The room gradually fell into a tense, broken quiet, everyone staring at the wreckage on the floor, the photos, the overturned chairs, the shattered illusion of family. Melissa sat trembling, silent now, tears running unchecked. Nobody touched her. Nobody spoke to her. They just looked at her like she was a stranger who desecrated the very man they were there to honor. I stood there, breathing hard, hands still shaking, and realized I'd gotten what I wanted. The truth was out. She was exposed. But the way Richard had looked at me, the words he'd bitten off, left a weight pressing against my chest. Because this wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. After everyone left and her mother slammed the bedroom door upstairs, the house felt like a church after a fire, quiet, blackened, air full of what used to be. Melissa stood in the kitchen with swollen eyes and a wineglass she didn't drink from, fingers worrying the stem like it might crack and spare her the talking. I leaned on the doorway, throat raw, waiting. She finally said it, voice small, "You think I don't hate myself?" I laughed once, ugly. Hate yourself on your own time. Start with how long? Her lip trembled, then she straightened like someone had pulled a wire inside her. "A year," she said, then flinched and pushed on, "more like 2. It started when Dad's chemo failed. He couldn't afford the second round. Richard paid. He said it was a loan, said not to tell Mom, said he'd handle the paperwork. He started coming to appointments, bringing food, fixing the furnace, he was everywhere, okay? And when Dad got worse, Richard was the only one who didn't crumble. I was drowning and she swallowed, eyes bright with shame. He knew exactly when to touch my elbow, exactly what to say. It felt like a life raft until it wasn't. I stared at her, a spark of pity trying to light and dying under the weight of rage. "So you repaid him behind a shed while we were burying your father?" She flinched so hard the glass chimed. "Don't," she whispered, then louder, "you don't understand the leverage. Dad signed things. Richard has paperwork, liens, guardianship addendums. If this blows up, Mom loses the house. He said if I ever told anyone he'd call the note, and she'd be on the street by winter." I wanted to say it was a lie, just another manipulation, but the way her voice broke on house shoved a needle into my chest. Then why'd he almost say something at dinner? Her eyes flicked to the window like she expected him on the lawn. Because that's his favorite trick. Pretend a truth is coming so everyone leans in, then he owns the pause. He was going to say Dad borrowed from him, for the good of the family, like he's some fucking saint. He keeps receipts of everything, even bags of groceries, like it's a ledger he can weaponize. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, angry at the tears. He kept me there with debt and guilt and, God, I'm not asking for forgiveness, I'm telling you why a smart woman did something that looks this stupid. He groomed all of us. Including you. My jaw clenched until it popped. Don't drag me into your choices. She stepped forward, sudden steel in her eyes I hadn't seen since before hospitals and hospice. He knew your schedule, your clients, your bad shoulder because I told him trying to survive the next week. He used it all to keep me scared. You think you're the one who caught him? He wanted you to catch enough, so you'd rage and ruin me in front of my family, because now Mom won't ask why the bank calls in 3 months. She'll just hate me. He's clean either way. My phone buzzed on the counter like a snake. Unknown number. I flipped it and bile surged. My front porch, tonight's date stamp, a photo taken from the street. The caption, nice lights. Cute wreath. We should talk without the choir next time. Melissa saw the color drain from my face and didn't have to ask. Another buzz. Garage on Willow, noon tomorrow. Alone. Or your mother-in-law learns what her husband signed, and what he took. I read it twice, heat roaring in my ears. What he took. I said, and Melissa's mouth pressed flat. Dad borrowed from the church fund when chemo started, she whispered, barely sound like the walls might tell on her. No one knows. Richard covered it and said he'd square it later if I cooperated. If he goes public, Mom doesn't just lose a house. She loses every friend she has. The room tilted. I heard my own breath like a rope creaking. So that's the game, I said. He starves the widow to punish the daughter. She nodded once, shoulders shaking with a laugh that had no humor. And the son-in-law? He makes sure you swing first so he can call you violent and wash his hands. She reached for me and I stepped back, the old reflex of wanting touch and the new habit of hating it colliding until I felt nauseous. Don't go tomorrow, she said, voice suddenly fierce. He'll have someone in the shadows. He'll make you hit him. He'll get you arrested and he'll show Mom the notice on the loan the same afternoon. He scripts everything. Another buzz. No cops. No wife. Bring the photos, we'll settle. I almost crushed the phone in my fist. Settle. Like my marriage is a fender bender and he's the adjuster. What if I go with a lawyer? I said, grasping at any door that wasn't a trap. She shook her head. He'll smell it and run to the board at the church first. Preempt. He always moves first. We stood there in that sick fluorescent light, two people who'd once promised to carry each other, now balancing on a wire strung between debt and shame. Outside, a car idled, then rolled past slow. I went to the window, heart thudding, but only headlights slid across our fence and vanished. When I turned back, Melissa had folded in on herself on the stool, small, wrecked. Tell me what to do, she said, so soft I almost missed it under the hum of the fridge. Tell me how we survive this without Mom losing everything. I wanted to say we don't, that she'd already chosen a man who feeds on ruin. Instead, something colder slid into place, the same calm that held my hand steady when I printed those photos. We write his script for him, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. We make him think I'm coming alone with proof to settle, and we give him a different stage. Her eyes lifted, hope and terror warring. What stage? Another buzz cut me off, and this time it wasn't a message. It was a call. No ID. I let it ring twice, then answered on speaker. Richard's voice spilled into our kitchen like oil. You made a mess tonight, he said conversationally, like he was talking about spilled gravy. You've got two choices. Be a good boy tomorrow and hand me what you printed, or I tell your mother-in-law exactly how her husband saved his own skin while he was dying. Maybe I drop a copy at the church office too. It'll be a hell of a Sunday. I stared at the phone, then at Melissa, then back at the glowing screen. And if I don't show? I asked. He chuckled low. Then I send photos of your wife on the hood of my car to every cousin in her contact list and let them guess the dates. I think the cemetery one's my favorite. Moody lighting. Melissa made a noise like she'd been punched. I swallowed the urge to drive through his face and said, calm as steel, noon on Willow. He hummed approval. Good man. Where's something dark? Rain's coming. He hung up. The room was suddenly too small for my skin. Melissa stood, mouth open, horror bright in her eyes. You're not going. I'm absolutely going, I said, and then I reached past the folder on the counter and clicked off the kitchen light, plunging us into our own reflections. But I'm not going the way he thinks. The plan uncoiled in my head faster than my fear could keep up. Timers, copies, one call I hadn't wanted to make, a place I hated more than the church where I'd watched him kiss her. And then, like the world wanted to punctuate the moment, my phone buzzed one more time. A final text from an unknown number, not his. If you meet him alone tomorrow, you won't come home. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred and felt the hair on my arms rise, because for the second time in a week a stranger was narrating my life, and this time the warning didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a countdown. I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table all night, phone face down, folder of photos beside me, listening to the pipes groan and the fridge hum while Melissa paced upstairs. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Richard's voice again. Where's something dark? Rain's coming. Like he'd already written the ending and I was just supposed to play my part. But I'd had enough of his scripts. If he wanted a meeting at Willow, he'd get one, but not on his terms. By dawn I'd mapped it out in my head. First, redundancy. I uploaded every file, every photo, even a recording of Richard's voicemail, to 3 different drives and scheduled emails with delayed send. One to Melissa's brother, one to her mother, one to the church board. If anything happened to me, the truth would scatter like shrapnel. Second, witnesses. I called Kevin at 7, my oldest friend, the one guy who never bought Richard's friendly uncle act. I told him everything, my voice flat like I was reading a police report. He swore, went silent, then said, "You're not going alone. I'll be there 10 minutes early off to the side. He won't see me. Third, insurance. I printed one last stack of the photos, slid them into an envelope, and tucked it under the driver's seat of Melissa's car. If she panicked and ran to him, fine, let him think he'd won early. The real deck was already stacked against him. Melissa came downstairs around 9, eyes red, hair tangled, like she hadn't slept either. She froze when she saw me in the same chair, same clothes, coffee gone cold in front of me. "You're really going?" she whispered. "He'll destroy you." I looked up, steady, colder than I'd ever felt. "Not if I destroy him first." She pressed her lips together, then shoved a folded piece of paper into my hand. "If something happens, read this." "Not before." Her eyes begged, but I slid it into my pocket without comment. She didn't ask to come. Maybe she knew better. By 11:40 I was parked a block from Willow, rain spitting on the windshield. The old garage sat like a carcass at the edge of town, corrugated steel walls rusting, weeds tall against the fence. A perfect stage for a man like Richard. I saw his black sedan already there, pulled up to the side entrance. My pulse hammered, but when I glanced in the rearview mirror I caught Kevin's car tucked behind a billboard. Good. At least I wasn't completely naked in the storm. At 11:55 my phone buzzed. "Come in." Back door. No greeting. No threats. Just a command. I swallowed hard, shoved the recorder into my jacket pocket and stepped out into the drizzle. Gravel crunched under my shoes as I crossed the lot. Every step felt heavier, like the air itself wanted to hold me back. The back door screeched open when I pushed it and the smell hit me first: oil, mildew, rust. The inside was dim, light filtering through broken panels, shadows long and sharp. Richard stood near a workbench, coat collar turned up, a smirk already carved on his face. He didn't move when I entered, just watched like a predator waiting for the prey to stumble closer. "You came," he said smoothly, like he hadn't threatened to ruin 3 generations of one family. "Smart man. Let's settle this quick." He tapped the bench. "The photos." I didn't move. My hand brushed the recorder in my pocket, thumb sliding over the switch. "You'll get them," I said. "But first you tell me what the hell you meant last night, what my father-in-law signed, what he took." His smirk widened, eyes glinting. "Curious, are we? He wasn't the saint you all worship. Borrowed from places he shouldn't have, begged me to clean up the mess. I did. And your wife's been paying interest ever since." He chuckled, low and filthy. "Best arrangement I ever made." Rage surged hot through me, but before I could speak, a new sound sliced through the garage. Footsteps, quick, sharp, not mine or his. Richard's head jerked toward the shadows, frown etching his face. "Who the fuck is that?" he barked. And in that second I realized this meeting wasn't just between us. Someone else had come to the party. The footsteps echoed hard against the concrete until a silhouette filled the far doorway, framed by pale daylight leaking through the crack. My gut dropped. I thought it was Kevin, that he'd blown his cover, but then the figure stepped closer and my blood ran cold. It wasn't Kevin. It was Melissa's brother, Daniel. He looked wrecked, tie loose, shirt damp from rain, eyes red like he hadn't slept in days. And in his hand, dangling awkwardly but unmistakably, was a baseball bat. "I knew it," he spat, voice shaking. "I knew something was wrong. Mom told me you two vanished at the reception, and then His eyes locked on Richard, and the hate pouring off him was raw, almost feral. "You ruined my family. You ruined her." Richard barked a laugh, too sharp, too rehearsed. "Oh please. Your sister came to me. Don't make me the villain for what she begged for." That single word, begged, made Daniel lunge, bat scraping the floor as he raised it. Richard didn't flinch. He just smirked wider, hands open like he was about to catch the swing. "Go ahead. Hit me. Make it easy. You think the cops won't love the grieving son attacking the only man keeping your mother out of foreclosure?" Daniel froze, bat trembling in his grip. "You son of a bitch." My pulse slammed in my ears. If Daniel swung, it was over. Richard would spin it, police would side with him, and everything I'd built would crumble. I stepped between them, hands up. "Don't," I hissed. "That's what he wants. He scripts it all." Richard tilted his head, grin like a knife. "Smart boy. Learning the game finally. Maybe there's hope for you." I felt the recorder burning in my pocket, every word he said etching itself into evidence. "No," I said, voice steady. "I'm not learning your game. I'm ending it." That's when headlights swept through the slats of the garage, tires crunching gravel. Another car pulled up outside. My stomach twisted as a door slammed, and footsteps joined the storm. For a split second I prayed it was Kevin, ready to back me up. But when the door creaked open again, it wasn't Kevin. It was Melissa. Her eyes darted from me to Daniel with the bat, to Richard smirking by the bench. And in that moment I knew, the script had just been torn in half. Melissa froze in the doorway, rain dripping from her hair, her chest heaving like she'd run the whole way. For a heartbeat no one moved. Richard's smirk bent into something sharper, satisfied. "Of course," he said softly, "the star of the show arrives." His voice dripped ownership, like he'd summoned her here. Daniel's grip tightened on the bat, knuckles white, veins bulging in his forearm. "Don't come closer, Mel," he warned, eyes still locked on Richard. "This isn't your fight anymore." But she stepped forward anyway, her heels echoing across the concrete, her face pale but her eyes, Christ, her eyes were burning. She looked at me first, then her brother, then finally at Richard. "You said you'd never drag them in," she hissed at him, voice shaking. "You swore it would stay between us." Richard chuckled, leaning back against the bench like a king on his throne. "And you believed me? After all this time, after all the nights I pulled your strings, you still think I'm a man of honor?" He shook his head, almost pitying. "You're weaker than your father ever was." Something in her snapped. She lunged forward, hands balled into fists, tears mixing with rain. "Don't you dare talk about him. Don't you dare." Her voice cracked into a sob, but she kept moving until she stood right in front of him. For a moment I thought she was going to slap him, and part of me wanted her to. But instead she turned her back on him and looked at me, desperation naked in her face. "Please. Please don't let him win." Richard laughed again, cruel, unshaken. "Win? What does that even mean? You think you three can touch me? Your father's debt is in writing. The board will eat you alive when they see where the money went. Your mother will be out of her house by Christmas. And you," his eyes cut to me cold as stone, "you'll be the angry husband with a violent streak. I've already got the narrative drafted." Daniel roared, raising the bat, but I shoved him back just in time. "Not like this." I barked. My hand slipped into my pocket, thumb pressing the recorder button, the little red light glowing under the tape. Richard's words, every poisonous syllable, were now etched forever. "You don't get to draft the ending," I said, stepping forward. "We do." Melissa's shoulders heaved. She pulled something from her purse, a folded paper, edges worn. My stomach clenched. It was the same note she'd shoved at me that morning. She opened it with trembling fingers, thrust it at her brother. "Dad wrote this," she whispered. Daniel scanned it, his mouth falling open. It's a confession," he said, eyes darting to me. "He admitted he took money from the fund. He begged forgiveness. Said Richard covered it until he could pay it back." Richard's face twisted, the first crack in his mask. "That letter means nothing," he snapped. "It won't stand against receipts, contracts." "Maybe not," I cut in, pulling the recorder from my pocket, holding it up. "But this will. Every threat, every admission, every word you just spat, it's all here. You think you control the story? Not anymore. This is enough to bury you in front of the same board you think you own." For the first time his smirk faltered. His eyes flicked between us, calculating, searching for a way out. Outside, thunder cracked, shaking the corrugated walls. And in that charged silence, I realized the balance had shifted. For once, Richard wasn't holding the pen. Richard's eyes darted from the recorder in my hand to the letter in Daniel's, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked cornered. No smirk, no swagger, just a man realizing the walls were finally closing in. His jaw worked, chewing on some excuse he couldn't spit out. Melissa stood rigid in front of him, tears running but her voice steady. "You don't get to own me anymore. You don't get to own my family. It ends here." For a long beat, all I heard was the rain hammering the steel roof, the storm outside pounding like war drums. Richard finally exhaled a low growl. "You think anyone will believe you? I've been the good man, the generous friend for decades. You're nothing but a bitter husband, a grieving daughter, and a kid with a temper. They'll laugh you out of the room." I stepped closer, close enough to smell the sour sweat under his cologne. "Then let's test that theory." I tapped the recorder, its little red light blinking. "I'll take this straight to the board, to the cops, to every person who's ever trusted you. Let them hear what you just said about debt, blackmail, and my wife. Let them hear your threats." For the first time his bravado cracked. He lunged for the device, but Daniel swung the bat up fast, stopping inches from Richard's ribs. "Try it," Daniel snarled. Richard froze, chest heaving, eyes narrowing. For once he had no script left to play. Melissa pulled the folded confession from her brother's hand and shoved it against Richard's chest. "This is Dad's truth. You twisted it into chains, but now it's going to set us free." He didn't take it, just stared at her, eyes burning with the kind of hate only a man stripped of power could feel. I backed toward the door, holding the recorder up like a torch. It's over, Richard. You don't get to write our lives anymore. Outside, headlights swept across the lot, Kevin's car. Relief crashed over me. He stepped out, phone in hand, camera already recording. Richard saw it, and I swear he shrank an inch. No more shadows. No more whispers. Witnesses. Evidence. We walked out together, me, Melissa, Daniel, into the rain, leaving Richard standing small and seething in that rotting garage. For the first time since the funeral, I felt air fill my lungs without burning. Melissa slipped her hand into mine. It was trembling, tentative, broken. I didn't squeeze back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But for now, we were alive, and Richard's reign over our family was finished. As Kevin locked eyes with me and gave a short nod, I realized the truth I'd been clawing toward for weeks. Betrayal can hollow you out, strip you raw, but sometimes it leaves enough room for something new. Not forgiveness, not trust, but freedom. And freedom was enough.